Hello and welcome to the Sidebar, presented by True Crime News, taking you inside the courtrooms of high-profile and notorious cases from across the country. I am your host, Joshua Ritter, criminal defense lawyer based in Los Angeles and previously an LA County prosecutor for nearly a decade. You can find me on all social media at Joshua Ritter ESQ or at joshuaritter.com. We are recording this on Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. In this week's episode, the suspicious death of actor Gene Hackman and his wife as authorities attempt to piece together the couple's final moments. Plus, do we have a hung jury in the trial of a judge charged with shooting his own wife? But first, the potential release of an assailant in the infamous Slender Man stabbing. Today, we are joined by Beth Karas, a veteran legal analyst who's been featured on 2020, Dateline, News Nation, and many other outlets. Beth, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I've been looking forward to this. Beth, I got to tell you, I always appreciate seeing you on television and your legal analysis because I know you've been doing this for a while, but you also take the time to really understand the issues behind all of these things. So no pressure, but I do appreciate always hearing your legal analysis on these cases.
Well, I appreciate hearing that. Thank you very much. I mean, I didn't practice anywhere near as long as you. I was a DA in Manhattan for 8 years and then went on to court TV for 19 years. And now I work in documentaries and I have a show on investigation discovery that's streaming on Max. But I do like to do that deep dive and investigate and really understand. And really, I went to court TV because I believe the mission was to educate the public about the criminal justice system. So I just continue to educate.
I love it. I love it. And I want to hear more about your show on Max too. So maybe you can fill us in on some of that later on. But let's jump right into these cases. First, out of Waukesha County, Wisconsin, where one of the assailants in the infamous Slender Man stabbing may be spending more time in a psychiatric facility despite a judge's order for her release. Morgan Geyser was 12 years old when she stabbed Peyton Lautner 19 times, nearly killing her. The attackers were motivated in the attempted slaying by an online fictional character known as Slender Man, whom they hoped to appease with the killing. Miraculously, Lautner survived. Both assailants were eventually convicted but found not guilty by mental disease or defect, with both girls suffering from symptoms of childhood schizophrenia. Geyser was sentenced to up to 40 years in an institution, but in January of this year, a judge ordered the Department of Health Services to devise a plan for her release within 60 days. That plan was eventually stayed by the same judge when officials from the institute filed a petition alleging that Geyser engaged in troubling behavior, including sending violent artwork in correspondence with a man outside of the facility and being in possession of questionable reading material. Geyser's defense denies that the woman, now 22, did anything inappropriate and maintains that Geyser is safe for release. A new hearing has been scheduled for March 6th to determine next steps in Geyser's release or continued institutionalization. This case, it's hard to forget it because of how kind of bizarre it was that they were doing this for this fictional character. And it really, I remember at the time, a lot of people were bothered by it. But I'm curious, what were your thoughts then? And the idea that two young people could both be suffering from these, childhood schizophrenia at the same time. What was your take on that?
So, look, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an expert in this area, but what jumps out at me about that diagnosis was that it was almost outcome determinative. What do you do with two 12-year-olds who have exhibited such a dangerous behavior? Because the law in most states regarding juveniles does not allow them to be incarcerated for a long time. Not in a prison. I mean, not at that age, but you're in a home for juveniles, right? And, until the age of maybe for 5 years, maybe to the age of 20, 21. It's almost like they were trying to fashion a way to keep these girls in a psychiatric facility, which is still, they're not free, right? For longer than the juvenile law would allow. That's what jumps out at me with this diagnosis. And you had to have a mental disease or defect in order to justify locking them up in a psychiatric facility for a long time. And then it's on the judge at some point to say, well, they're no longer a danger. to society, to themselves or other people, or whatever, and release them. But that no one's got a crystal ball. No one can say for sure. But there is a little bit of behavior on the part of one that says, hang on, pump the brakes here. Maybe she shouldn't be released. She's engaging in violent type behavior with someone on the outside.
I have not thought about it the way that you just put it, but I think you might be absolutely right. It scared people. And I think people thought the idea of them just being handled in the normal way that a juvenile might have been, with that idea that they would just be expected for release at a young age, bothered people. Maybe you're absolutely right. This was seen as a kind of safer way of keeping an eye on them. And yeah, it seems as though Geyser might not entirely be well enough to re-enter society. But I'm curious about that, because one of the things they have identified was that she had questionable reading material. And the book that I've read in a report that she had was a Stephen King novel. Now, the novel has depictions of violent sexual acts, organ harvesting. Let me put it this way. If you've ever read Stephen King, it's kind of par for the course with a lot of his works. But it made me wonder, well, are we now, how straight of a line does this young lady have to walk before people feel safe enough for her to get released? Do you follow me on that?
Absolutely. And you raise a good point. I remember a case, and I can't recall which one it is right now, but somebody had like religious material in a psychiatric facility. And because religious material deals with, angels or whatever, it was justified to keep the person in. They still had magical thinking. And it's like, well, wait a second. People are reading the Bible and all kinds of stuff on the outside all the time, and it's completely mainstream. So you can almost, this is a book that has a lot of violent stuff in it. Stephen King. I can't read some of his books. They upset me too much. Yet I cover crime on a daily basis, right? Go figure.
Right.
But you can make whatever argument you need to justify keeping a person in. She probably needs to be medicated, although, I can't say for sure. She's 22 now. People who get released from these psychiatric facilities, we rely on them as adults to continue their self-medication. And if they go off it, then they become incapable of caring for themselves. The streets of Manhattan, where I live, are full of homeless people who are mentally ill, who have gone off the rails because they need the guidance to be kept on track, right? Anyway, I'd be curious to see what the hearing, which is in the next few days, results in, because do children present with schizophrenia at 12 years old? I don't know. Yeah. It seems awfully young to have that diagnosis.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, the point about the book too, because like you said, she's under a microscope, right? They things that she does that may not raise red flags in the behavior of a child who's not under such supervision. It's going to be treated differently. But to the point of the book, if I go check out this same book, and I don't know which one it is, but if I go check out this same book from the library, I can't imagine I'm going to get flagged. I can't imagine people are going to say, I need to keep an eye on that man. What is he reading? But she reads it, and all of a sudden there's issues.
Exactly. But then again, maybe her brain isn't healthy, and reading a book like that could trigger something. No. Also, the study of brains and the neurological development, brain development has come a long way in the last few decades. And actually, I'm working on a podcast now that I'm co-hosting about just brain development and criminal behavior with juveniles. And so we've been talking to a lot of experts in this area. The brain isn't fully developed until we're in our mid-20s. And when you look at the law and where the law draws a line on when someone's mature enough to die for their country, that's 18. Drive a car, which arguably is a deadly weapon, that's 16. Drink alcohol, well, that was raised to 21 during my lifetime, but it used to be 18, at least in some states. 21 and then to vote was 18. There's all kinds of lines for when you're mature enough to make important decisions. But your brain isn't fully developed until you're in your mid-20s. So your impulse control, the ability to appreciate the consequences of your actions isn't there. Definitely not there when you're 12 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a good point. It's a case that not only raises such bizarre issues given the nature of the crime itself, but then it raises all these really fascinating kind of issues about how long should we supervise someone, and at what point do we feel like they're safe enough to walk amongst us again. Yeah, we will continue to watch that because, like I said, that hearing is coming up later this week, and we'll see what the judge ends up doing.
When it comes to money, you never want to learn lessons the hard way. And that brings us to today's sponsor, Acorns. Acorns is a financial wellness app that makes it easy to start saving and investing in your future. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that matches you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you get started with the spare money that you've got right now, even if all you've got is spare change. You also don't need a ton of time. You can create your Acorns account and start investing in just 5 minutes. Investing is something that's very easy to pull off. I know it is one of those things that you think, oh, I'll just figure that out next month. But with Acorns, it's easy to do it right now. Sign up now and join the over 13 million all-time customers who have already saved and invested over $22 billion with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/truecrime or download the Acorns app to get started. Paid non-client endorsement compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorn Advisors LLC is an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/truecrime.
Let's move to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where the investigation into the deaths of a famous actor and his wife remain under suspicion after the mysterious circumstances surrounding their passing. Gene Hackman, his wife Betsy Arakawa, and one of their dogs were all found dead in their home on February 26th. The pair had likely been dead for at least a week prior to their discovery, making the investigation more difficult due to the decomposition of their bodies. Hackman was found in the home's mudroom and appeared to have suffered a sudden fall, while Arakawa was found in the bathroom surrounded by prescription pills. Though autopsy and toxicology reports are still pending, authorities ruled out carbon monoxide poisoning as a cause in their deaths. While the couple was found, the door to their home was unlocked and unsecured, and while there were no signs of blunt force trauma to the bodies, the deaths have been labeled, quote, suspicious, and authorities will attempt to analyze cell phone data to piece together the couple's demise. Beth, jump right into this because I feel like we all reacted to this the same way, and I'm curious to know what your first thoughts were when we hear about, of course, Hackman being a famous actor, we were all paying attention. But when you have two people who appear to have dropped dead where they stood, along with the dog, unexplained otherwise, it is kind of suspicious, right?
It is. I mean, my first reaction was carbon monoxide. And then, of course, within 24 hours or so, they ruled it out because they said there was no obvious leak in the house. I don't know if they determined, from blood or whatever, whether there was some elevated level in them, but there was no obvious leak in the house. So once that was ruled out, I was like, okay, they may not have died at the same time, but I don't know. It's suspicious. It's suspicious only because it's not obvious yet what happened. And every death, like at home has to be, or in most areas, they have to be treated as though it's criminal. So you don't compromise the scene or any of the evidence until you're satisfied that it was natural or an accident or suicide or something like that. So while there doesn't appear to be the telltale signs of something that, of a home invasion, a robbery, a burglary, whatever, it doesn't mean that didn't happen because the doors were unlocked, but I suspect once they get the toxicology that they'll see that there were substances in them. He had a heart attack. Maybe she knocked herself out and took pills and he was trying to get help for her and had a heart attack doing that, not the other way around. I know Dr. Michael Bodden, the renowned New York forensic pathologist, was positing possibly that he had a heart attack. She was rushing to get him his pills because he was taking various medications for typical, illnesses you have when you're aging. And then she fell and hit herself and knocked herself out, I mean, I think it's probably going to be something like that, but it's going to be labeled suspicious until they can rule out that it's not.
I think Bodden might be spot on. I was heard from a medical examiner that the reason they were able to rule out carbon monoxide so quickly, in addition to finding no leaks, but apparently a body that has died from carbon monoxide will look red, will be very flushed. It's the way the body reacts to that. They can almost immediately tell just by looking if it was a carbon monoxide poisoning. So though they don't have toxicology, they were able to quickly kind of rule that out. But I think Bodden is right on. If Gene Hackman, and we now know that his pacemaker had stopped signaling or had indicated that his heart had stopped pumping perhaps 9 days before they were discovered. So if, as sad as it is, if Gene Hackman had died, he's 95 years old, his pace, he has a heart attack. I don't think anybody would be beside themselves with curiosity. But the fact that she died, I imagine close to that, at least not long enough to call 911, is what makes us all go, wait a minute here. But Bodden might be right. She might have been rushing to the bathroom in a hurry, trying to grab pills to help him. And then something, bizarre, but not unheard of happens. But now it creates this curious situation, which is my long-winded way of bringing myself to the question of, you've been following cases for years. You worked as a DA. Don't you sometimes find that almost in all of these cases, there's just mysteries and just weird things that happen, but doesn't necessarily mean foul play's involved in some of these cases?
Absolutely. Sometimes we don't get all the answers, but we can't say there's foul play. Sometimes when there is foul play, you still don't have all the answers about what happened. Sometimes we can never find out who did it when it's foul play or why they did it. So there are always questions, foul play or not.
Yeah. I remember when I was a prosecutor, one of the things I would always try to cover during voir dire is I would tell jurors, listen, I plan to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt all the elements of the crime. But you are 12 smart and curious people, and I can't possibly answer all the questions in your head. So if you're along for that ride, then we're going to be okay. But if you expect me to answer every question in your head, there's just no possible way. And I feel like, curious to hear your thoughts, I feel like a lot of these cases that start to have conspiracy theory surrounding them are just cases where sometimes something bizarre happened.
Correct. And, you can't, as you say, prove something beyond a shadow of a doubt. Nothing's 100%. It's just a reasonable doubt. Did jurors respond to you that? Would they say, well, I want you to answer all my questions, and then you'd kick them off the jury?
If they said that, sure. And I think it was kind of more laying the groundwork for, hey, you might walk out of this courtroom and I might prove all the elements, but just because you still have mysteries in your head, don't give me that added burden.
Right. We used to say, do not check your common sense at the door, bring it into the jury with you. You have to just, and if it looks like a doc and acts like a doc, it is. So don't overthink it.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's incredibly sad for the loss of that incredible actor, one of my favorites. But I just hope that we're able to get some answers soon, because I would hate for his demise to kind of be clouded with all this controversy. It would be nice to be able to put him and his family and loved ones to, have them be able to put him to rest in peace. And hopefully we'll have those answers soon.
It may be February, but most people are still doing their best to keep those New Year's resolutions going. If you're in debt, I have a great resolution for you to consider. Make this the year that you get on top of your finances. The first step is to contact PDS Debt for a personalized debt solution. If you're making payments every month on your debt and your balances aren't going down, PDS has the solution for you. Everyone with $10,000 or more in eligible debt qualifies, and there is no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit is accepted. Save more while paying off your debt in a fraction of the time. Being in debt can feel scary and overwhelming. So where do you start? How do you climb out of it? But remember, you're not alone. PDS Debt can help. Make this the year you take control of your debt. Get a free debt analysis right now at pdsdebt.com/truecrime. It only takes 30 seconds. That's PDSD PDSDebt.com/true crime. PDSdebt.com/true crime.
Let's move on to our final case out of Orange County, California, where the fate of a judge charged with his wife's murder hangs in the balance as jurors indicate they are deadlocked in their verdict. Jurors have been deliberating the case of Jeffrey Ferguson, a former Orange County judge, for nearly a week as he faces charges for the fatal shooting of his wife, Cheryl, in the couple's home. Allegedly, the couple had been in a heated argument at dinner earlier in the evening when Ferguson allegedly pointed a finger gun at his wife in a threatening gesture. According to the couple's adult son, Philip, the fight continued when the family returned home, with Cheryl allegedly saying something to the effect of, "Why don't you point a real gun at me?" Prosecutors say that enraged Ferguson, who was likely intoxicated, then produced a firearm with his ankle holster before fatally shooting Cheryl. While Ferguson allegedly confessed to the shooting via text with colleagues and officers on the scene, he claims that the shooting was an accidental discharge. Jurors remain deadlocked on the charge of a second-degree murder. However, they informed Judge Eleanor Hunter that they may be able to come to a decision after another day of deliberation. As they attempted to render a verdict, Judge Hunter may also allow prosecutors and Ferguson's defense to deliver additional closing arguments if that would help avoid a stalemate, a move very rarely seen after deliberations are already underway. Beth, I want to talk to you about this idea of reopening closing arguments again. I love this. As a trial attorney, I always encourage this option from the judge if jurors were hung up on some issue, and that might just come from a place of feeling like just give me another chance to argue, and they're gonna see my way on this. But what do you think about that idea of allowing attorneys another shot at maybe clearing up some of the issues jurors might be hung up on?
Well, first of all, I've never seen it. I believe it has happened, but I've never seen it. And it does seem that if jurors are close, like I don't know if you can always know what the vote is, but if it's 10-2, 11-1 or something, and it would be in the interest of judicial economy and efficiency not to have to go back to the drawing board with a new jury, just spend all that time again, all those witnesses having to come back, just address the issues. So I think that it's not a bad idea. I've just never seen it, but why not if they're close, right? Just have one more shot at advocating for your position and addressing, maybe if you can glean from their notes, what is hanging them up.
Yeah.
In this case,
sorry?
what's hanging them up, I suspect, is what his state of mind, right? I mean, to go from second-degree murder to involuntary manslaughter, which is the next, if they find him not guilty of second-degree, jurors probably don't know that there's a vast difference in California in the sentence range.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Huge. I mean, we're talking decades sometimes, depending on how they're sentenced and the other allegations involved. Yeah.
I mean, that was the big battle when Conrad Murray, the doctor who killed Michael Jackson, was charged. I know there was a battle of whether to charge him with second-degree murder under a depraved heart theory versus involuntary manslaughter. And Steve Cooley, the DA, went with involuntary manslaughter. He got a 2 to 4 year sentence. Now, there was no gun. There wasn't a gun enhancement, but that is here in the case of the judge. But he would have served 15, a minimum, right? 15 to life if convicted of second-degree murder. Big difference.
Huge difference. Really good point. I have seen this situation where maybe it's a practice more in California. I know every state's different and judges are different, but I've seen it in California where the judges will allow them to reopen not the entire universe of their closing, but if there's a specific, like if jurors, you sometimes know, what are they hung up on? They keep asking questions about a certain thing. Like you said, maybe here it's intent. They don't quite understand what that means. And they'll allow them to give kind of limited argument on intent. And you make such a good point, because let's save this. If we're all trying to save ourselves from having to go through a retrial and all of the work that's undertaken with that, and it might be as simple as having someone explain that to them, I say, go for it. I tell you what, it's a lot better than you see what judges do sometimes with this, they call it the dynamite charge or whatever it is, where they just really kind of pound their fist and say, get back there and work together, right?
Right. And some find that coercive. It's like, really, you tell us not to compromise and listen to ourselves, but listen to our colleagues, but at the same time stick to your guns if you really believe in it. It's like, and then you're going to coerce us into coming to a decision.
Yeah. One last question on this one. This case is not so clear cut. You would think it is, because the allegations are that he pulled a gun from his ankle holster after she had kind of dared him to, and then he shoots her, and then texts his court clerk, says, "I'm not coming in tomorrow." I thought that was very kind of him. "I'm not coming in. I just shot my wife. I'm so sorry." Tells police, "I'm horrible. I just shot my wife." But interestingly, doesn't explain, was it an accident? Was it on purpose? So there is some room for argument there. But I'm curious, given that he's been a judge, has no criminal record, they're not going to hear any of this awful stuff about him. They just hear about this kind of one drunken night in their marriage where they get into an argument. Do you think that's what jurors are struggling with, is this idea of a judge committing such a horrible kind of cold-blooded crime that he's being accused of?
So not having observed the trial, it's hard to say, not having watched the jurors, but I would not be surprised if that is a consideration. Like, do we really want to send this judge at his age for so many years to prison for murder? I mean, right. He was drinking. They were having a fight. He got excited. It was not an accidental discharge, I suspect, though. I mean, you really you have to have your finger on the trigger, right? Yeah, I mean, so his finger's on the trigger, and he pulls it and points it at her, shoots her in the chest. Really? Accidental or not? I mean, he should do some time. I don't know if he should go down for involuntary or second-degree murder, but I wouldn't be surprised if his background also weighs on jurors. They shouldn't. It's the judge who should take the background into consideration to the extent there's any discretion with sentencing. The judge should do that, but, jurors know who he is.
Yeah. I agree with you. I feel like if you've ever handled a gun in your life, the idea of a accidental discharge kind of really goes out the window when you really know what goes involved into firing a gun. But I don't know. That's what he went with. That's what he told jurors. He testified himself. That could have carried things. But we probably, as we're recording this, they're probably making a decision on whether or not it's a hung jury. So we will try to keep everybody updated on that. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You've got a lot of projects that you're working on. Could you tell us a little bit about some of those?
Yeah, sure. So I have been a part of 3 seasons of a series that is streaming on Max. It's an investigation discovery series called The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, about a little person who was adopted by an American family. She's from Ukraine. And then it's an amazingly involved saga. Is she an adult posing as a child? And it goes on and on. 3 seasons of that, and that's now streaming on Max. But I got a spin-off series as a result called Curious Case of, and it's 6 episodes. Also, they're all out now, so they're all streaming on Max. And each episode is a standalone different story. It's not one long involved story, and they're just weird cases of cults, and they're not murder cases of funeral director abusing corpses in Colorado, of a man faking his death to avoid sexual assault charges in the United States, and he flees abroad. Weird stories. And, I'm hoping that we get to continue that. So that's what I'm up to right now. And the podcast I'm working on, season 2 of a podcast called Unrestorable for iHeartRadio.
That's fantastic. You heard it here first, everybody. Check out those series. Check out the podcast. Again, thank you. I'm your host, Josh Ritter. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Joshua Ritter ESQ. And if you want to hear my thoughts and coverage on even more true crime cases, you can check out my brand new YouTube channel, Courtroom Confidential. And of course, you can find all of our Sidebar episodes wherever you get your podcasts, and we would love to hear from you. If you've got questions or comments you'd like us to address, please tweet us your questions with the hashtag TCN Sidebar. And thank you for joining us at the True Crime News Sidebar.